My name's Oscar. I'm 27, run a private logistics firm that's done surprisingly well over the last few years. And until recently, I was dating a woman named Daniela. We'd been together for about 2 years. On paper, it looked picture perfect. She was smart, charming, from an old money family with all the polish you'd expect. Polished teeth, polished dinnerware, polished judgments. Me? I was the outsider. The guy who didn't grow up summering in Florence or brunching with investment bankers. The guy whose father left when he was 10, who worked 2 jobs in college and built his business from the ground up without connections, handouts, or family dinners in mansions with fireplaces taller than him. And to be honest, I was fine with that. I liked my quiet wins. Daniela and I met at a conference in San Diego. She was working in nonprofit consulting, had a sharp wit, and was surprisingly down to earth for a while. The first 6 months were great. She said she liked that I was independent, a builder, someone who didn't need his hand held. I thought she admired me. I thought her family might too, eventually. I was wrong. I think they tolerated me at best, or maybe Daniela was just really good at pretending they did. The first time I met her family was at her dad's 60th birthday. It was a massive affair, black tie, rooftop venue overlooking the city, string quartet playing something I couldn't pronounce. Daniela told me not to wear a tie, that her family was super chill about that stuff. When I showed up in a navy jacket and open collar shirt, her mother gave me a once-over and said, "Oh, bold choice." That should have been my first clue. The little jabs continued for months. Her older brother, Chase, once asked if I'd parked my Uber out front or if I'd taken the night off. Her sister Brielle corrected the way I pronounced charcuterie, like I'd insulted her ancestors. Daniela always laughed it off. "That's just how they are," she'd say. "Don't take it personally." So I didn't. At least, not for a while. I tried to brush it off, smile politely, offer a bottle of wine I'd spent way too long choosing, and act like I didn't see the way her dad's eyes glazed over any time I mentioned my company. They were the type of people who asked what school you went to not because they cared, but because they wanted to rank you. And since I didn't go Ivy, I didn't rank. I started noticing Daniela slowly picking up some of those habits, too, correcting me at dinners, telling me my shoes were too brown for that suit, or that my tone on the phone sounded a little aggressive when I was dealing with clients. Once, she asked if I could maybe downplay the whole entrepreneur thing around her cousins because they're really into traditional careers. I remember standing in her kitchen, frozen, staring at her like she'd slapped me. I didn't say anything at the time. I just nodded and said, "Sure." Looking back now, I wish I had spoken up sooner. But love does weird things to your sense of self-worth. I think it all really started to shift last Thanksgiving. Her family invited me to join them at their estate. Yes, estate. In Connecticut. It was a whole production. Horse stables, a winter wine tasting, a fireplace in every room, and a long list of passive-aggressive digs delivered over cranberry sauce. I brought a limited-run wine from a vineyard my company had a contract with, something truly rare, and her mom looked at it and said, "Oh, Red, that's bold for turkey." Chase offered me a man's apron for the turkey carving contest and laughed like he was hosting a roast. Her dad didn't even acknowledge me when I shared that we'd just signed our biggest contract yet. He just asked if I'd thought about getting an MBA to fill in the gaps. Still, I stayed, because Daniela would squeeze my hand under the table or give me that look like, "Just survive this weekend, and we'll be home soon." I told myself I could endure the snide comments, the carefully veiled insults, the quiet condescension. I told myself it was just a test, that maybe someday I'd be part of the circle. And a tiny, insecure part of me, one I thought I'd buried years ago, wanted that. Wanted to be accepted, respected, wanted to belong. But something started brewing in me after that weekend. A slow, creeping sense of shame I couldn't place. Like I was slowly turning into a version of myself that would smile through disrespect just to keep the peace. That version made me sick. Then came the birthday dinner. It was supposed to be a celebration. My birthday was technically the next day, but Daniela said her family wanted to treat us to an early dinner at this ultra-exclusive restaurant in the city, one I knew had a months-long wait list. I was surprised, even flattered. I showed up in my best suit. Even brought a small gift for her mother, a rare tea set I found from a little boutique in Tokyo. Daniela had mentioned her mom collected them. We were seated at the head table, right in the center of the room. Waiters in white gloves. Candlelight glinting off gold-rimmed glasses. The works. The whole family was there. Her parents, siblings, their partners, even a couple of cousins I barely knew. I remember thinking, maybe this is it. Maybe they're finally trying. The dinner started out fine, a little too formal, but manageable. Then the wine started flowing. And with it, the comments. So, Oscar, Chase leaned in with a smirk. How's business? Still hauling boxes. Chase, Daniela said, laughing nervously. He doesn't haul anything. He runs the company. Right. Logistics. Very glamorous. Then her mom chimed in, asking if I'd ever considered going back to school to polish up the resume. Her dad asked if I wanted him to connect me with someone in his firm, just in case the startup thing didn't pan out. Every laugh at the table felt sharper than the last. Daniela wasn't defending me this time. She was quiet, distant, staring at her wine like she was waiting for something. Then she cleared her throat, put down her glass, and said, Actually, I've been meaning to say something. The whole table fell silent. Even the waiter paused mid-pour. My stomach tightened. I think it's time we went our separate ways, she said. Just like that. It's not working anymore. I think we both know it. I felt the air get sucked out of the room. My ears rang. For a moment, I thought I'd misheard. Before I could speak, her brother laughed. Man, you're really nothing without us, huh? Her mom added. Be grateful we even let you sit at our table, dear. And just like that, the dam broke. I felt everything. Shock, betrayal, rage, crashing down all at once. But I didn't argue. I didn't yell. I didn't ask why, or beg or plead, or try to save face. I just checked the time. And seconds later, like clockwork, a fleet of black SUVs pulled up outside the restaurant. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the whole family watched in stunned silence as the drivers in suits stepped out, coordinated, calm, like something out of a movie. A moment later, a waiter returned with a small bow and said, Sir, your security detail has arrived. The room went dead silent. I stood up slowly, adjusted my cufflinks, and looked around the table, every single one of them frozen, their mouths half open, wine glasses trembling slightly in their hands. And I hadn't even told them yet what was coming. You could have heard a pin drop. I didn't look at Daniela. Not right away. I watched her family first. Her father squinted at me like he was trying to remember if I was a valet who got too close to the table. Her mother's mouth tightened so much I could see her jaw clench through the candlelight. And Chase? Oh, Chase was already doing the math. I saw it in his eyes. The SUVs. The timing. The deference from the waiter. The total lack of panic in me. But Daniela? She looked stunned. Not heartbroken, stunned. As if she'd just realized she misjudged the plot of the movie she was in. I gave a polite nod to the waiter. Tell Mr. Duval I'll be just a moment, I said. The waiter dipped his head and stepped away. Mr. Duval wasn't real. Not in this context. Just a placeholder I used when I didn't feel like explaining things. The name sounded rich and important enough to cause confusion. That was the point. Let them wonder. I turned back to the table, my hands in my pockets, and for a split second, I considered walking out without saying a word. Letting the image burn into their memory. The guy they mocked, discarded, belittled, now being escorted out like someone whose name was on the deed, not the guest list. But I didn't leave. Not yet. Because something inside me, something quiet and heavy, told me this wasn't over. Not even close. Instead, I leaned forward, looked Daniela in the eyes, and said, Thank you for dinner. She blinked, caught off guard. Oscar, but I was already walking. Past the marble bar, past the awestruck staff, out into the velvet dark night where the SUVs waited like sentinels. The driver opened the door for me. I slid in without a word. We didn't drive away right away. I sat in silence, staring at the warm lights from the restaurant windows, still visible through the tinted glass. I watched Chase lean across the table, whispering furiously to Daniela. Her mother pulled out her phone and typed something, probably a frantic search for my name. Maybe even looking up the firm she never bothered to remember. Good. Let them scramble. But the truth is, as much as that moment felt like victory, it wasn't. Not yet. Because what they didn't know, what even Daniela didn't know, was how far this had gone, how deep the disrespect had cut, and how long I'd been waiting for this exact moment to turn the tables. It started 2 months earlier, during a weekend trip to the family's vacation home in Vermont. It was supposed to be a relaxing getaway. Wine, fireplaces, hiking. Daniela had insisted I come. Said her parents were warming up to me. I didn't believe her, but I went. Partly because I wanted to believe it, and partly because I knew what I was starting to plan. The house was massive. Floor-to-ceiling windows, a wraparound porch, even an indoor sauna. But it wasn't warm. Not to me. The entire weekend, they treated me like hired help. Her mom asked if I could help Chase bring in firewood. Her dad joked about how handy I must be with a wrench, seeing as I didn't grow up with full-time staff. Daniela stayed mostly silent, smiled at the right moments. But I could see it in her, the shift. The same shift I saw months ago when she asked me to dial it down around her college friends. They were prepping me to be discarded. I didn't say anything that weekend. I just took note. Every jab, every comment. Every time her dad asked Chase's girlfriend about her fellowship, but barely looked at me. Every time Daniela laughed a little too hard at a joke that was clearly aimed at me. And then it happened. The moment that changed everything. We were sitting by the fire Saturday night. Wine glasses in hand, the family all gathered. Daniela was telling a story about our trip to Greece. How we got lost in Athens and ended up eating at a random taverna that turned out to be the best meal of the trip. Everyone was half listening until she said this. And Oscar, bless him, he was trying so hard to ask for directions, but it was kind of adorable watching him flail with the language. I kept thinking, I should have brought someone a little more cosmopolitan. She said it with a smile, like it was charming, like I wasn't sitting right next to her. The room chuckled. Chase let out a full laugh and clinked glasses with Brielle. And me? I froze. It was like everything around me slowed down. The crackling fire, the murmurs, the clink of crystal against crystal. And in that moment, I realized something I'd been too blind to accept. I was never going to be enough for them. Not smart enough, not rich enough, not pedigreed enough. And now, even Daniela, who once said she loved my ambition, was laughing along with the wolves. I set my wine glass down, stood up, and walked outside. Nobody followed. I stood on the icy porch for a long time, hands in my coat pockets, watching the trees sway under the moonlight. And I made a decision. No more defending myself. No more enduring. They wanted to see me as the outsider? Fine. I'd show them exactly what an outsider can do when he stops trying to be accepted. The next morning, I left before breakfast. Told Daniela I had a business emergency. She didn't argue, just kissed me on the cheek and said, try to relax. The entire drive back, I planned. My company, while modest looking on the outside, held some very valuable leverage. We specialized in high-tier transport logistics. Think rare art, sensitive data equipment, VIP clients, and yes, the occasional high-net-worth individual who needed discreet relocation services. I had government contracts. Private ones. I didn't flaunt it, but people who paid attention knew. Apparently, Daniela's family didn't. They should have. Over the next 6 weeks, I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I activated old contacts. Clients who owed me favors. People with access to information. I asked questions. Not about Daniela. About her family. Their businesses. Their deals. Their holdings. I found the cracks. And I didn't exploit them, yet. I just mapped them out. Quietly. Thoroughly. I learned things. Interesting things. Like the fact that Chase's new crypto fund was built on a shaky foundation, reliant on a storage facility in Nevada, one that quietly used my firm for secure data transport. Or that Daniela's mother had been negotiating a hush-hush deal to acquire rare antiques from an estate sale we had partial logistics rights to. Or that her father had been quietly moving assets through a third-party broker my company had full visibility into. They'd never bothered to ask what kind of clients I worked with. Never asked how just logistics had allowed me to live in a penthouse and own 2 properties before 30. They assumed it was luck, or inflation, or maybe a girlfriend's handout. And now, they'd invited me to dinner. The Last Supper, in their minds. A final act of dismissal. Break up with the outsider in public, surrounded by family, and reassert their perfect circle. They had no idea I was already holding the strings. So when Daniela said, it's time we went our separate ways, I didn't flinch. Because I was no longer trying to sit at their table. I was building a new one. And now, 2 hours after that dinner, I sat in my apartment, lights dimmed, staring at the city skyline, phone buzzing every few minutes with missed calls, from Daniela, from Chase, even one from her mom. I didn't answer. Not yet. Instead, I opened my laptop, typed in a command, and set the next part in motion. The night after that dinner, I barely slept. Not because I was sad, it was something else. Like standing on the edge of a cliff and finally realizing you'd been sitting in the dark, waiting for someone to push you. And now that they had, the fall didn't scare me anymore. Still, the silence that followed was loud. Daniela didn't try calling again. Not after the fifth missed call. I guess when your family spends years convincing you someone's beneath you, it's easier to pretend they never mattered at all once they walk away. But it wasn't just her. It was the whole network. Friends we used to see together started ghosting me. I get texts like, "Hey man, just caught up in work, let's reschedule," and I knew they wouldn't. Our couples group chat died overnight. Her cousin, a real estate agent I once helped land a high-end client, posted a picture with Chase the next day captioned, "Real recognizes real." I was alone again, and for the first time in years, I didn't have a reason to perform. No hand to hold. No approval to chase. Just me. That first week after the breakup, I didn't eat much. I worked. A lot. Buried myself in logistics schedules and infrastructure contracts. I streamlined systems that had been waiting months for attention. I spent whole nights mapping future expansions, organizing financials, cutting dead weight. I didn't talk to anyone. Just focused. That tunnel vision kind of productivity? It's the kind that usually comes from pain. And yeah, I was in pain. Not because I missed Daniela, but because I hated that I let myself shrink for that long. Shrink to fit into a mold. Shrink to seem smaller so I wouldn't threaten their egos. Shrink to survive around people who were never going to love me unless I came with a trust fund and a last name worth Googling. By the second week, I started running again. Literally. Mornings, before the sun came up. Put on my beat-up sneakers. No music, just pavement and cold air and the sound of my own breath. It hurt. My legs burned. My lungs stung. But there was something honest about that kind of pain. Something earned. I started journaling, too. Something I hadn't done since I was 19 and broke, writing ideas on napkins during night shifts. I wrote down everything I remembered from that relationship, every red flag I ignored, every moment I told myself to stay quiet, every time I played the reasonable guy because it was easier than making a scene. And for every entry, I wrote one thing I was going to do for myself from now on. By the end of that week, the list had grown into pages. Never let someone apologize on your behalf. Never say, "I'm lucky to be here," when you built the damn door yourself. Don't dress smaller. Don't speak softer. Don't shrink. I didn't know it then, but I was rebuilding. Not from scratch, because the core of me was never broken, but from beneath the weight of people who never saw me clearly. One night, maybe 3 weeks after the breakup, I got a text from someone I hadn't heard from in a long time. Brian, a former mentor turned investor. The kind of guy who wore sweatshirts to million-dollar meetings and who always said, "The right kind of revenge is living well, but better than they ever thought you could." He'd heard about a potential opportunity in Dubai, a logistics bottleneck no one could seem to solve. Delays, mismanagement, customs nightmares. "I thought of you," he said. "You still that stubborn kid who doesn't take no for an answer?" I flew out 4 days later. That trip changed everything. It wasn't glamorous. I wasn't staying at the Burj Al Arab or sipping cocktails by a pool. I was in and out of warehouses, sitting with frustrated local teams, drawing routes on whiteboards in windowless offices, reviewing supply chain databases at 2 a.m. over vending machine coffee. But I was alive, sharp, fully myself again. No performance, no pretenses. In 2 weeks, I streamlined their system, cut transit delays by 18%, and saved them close to $1 million in customs bleed. They offered me a retainer on the spot, more than I'd made in the last quarter. I flew home with a new contract, a renewed fire, and a silent promise in my chest. I will never play small again. Back in New York, things started moving fast. A client referred me to a boutique art security firm. They had a problem with route security for high-value transport. My firm stepped in. We crushed it. That led to another deal. Then another. Before I knew it, I was opening a second office. I hired smart. I hired quiet. I didn't want noise. I wanted builders. People who'd been overlooked. People who, like me, knew what it felt like to be talked over. And that team? They came in with something to prove. We were a small ship with a heavy engine. Fast. Lethal. Focused. Meanwhile, I started hearing whispers. Chase's fund, the one he bragged about at dinner, it wasn't doing well. His biggest investor pulled out after a massive dip in his tech portfolio. Turns out the same crypto broker Chase used. My company now handled their transport security. I didn't sabotage anything. But let's just say when you know where the pressure points are, you don't need to push. You just let gravity do the rest. Daniela's mother? She tried to finalize that antique acquisition from overseas. But the pieces were being routed through a European firm I'd just partnered with. Nothing shady, of course. Just a processing delay caused by a surprise compliance audit. Paperwork takes time, especially when you're importing high-value items with unclear provenance. And Daniela? I didn't hear from her for a while. Until one night. It was late. I was on my balcony, glass of rye in hand, looking out over the city lights. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. Hey, the voice said. It was her. There was a long pause. I saw the thing in Forbes, she said. Your company. The growth. I stayed quiet. She added, my mom said she ran into someone from your team in Paris. Said you've gone global. I sipped my drink. You sound good, she said. That was when I realized I didn't feel anything. No ache. No pull. No temptation to prove her wrong anymore. Because I already had. And not just to her. To myself. I am, I said. I really am. There was another pause. Then, I'm sorry, Oscar. For that night. For everything. And just like that, the last thread snapped. Not with anger. Not with revenge. With peace. Because I didn't need her apology. I'd already rebuilt from the ground up. Stronger. Clearer. Untouchable. The morning I decided to begin, I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel triumphant, either. I felt surgical. Focused. Cold in the best possible way. Like I was finally holding the scalpel instead of being the patient on the table. By this point, the business had evolved far beyond anything Daniela or her family had ever imagined. We had international reach, a rotating cast of ultra-high net worth clients, and contracts that had to be redacted before being shown to most legal teams. I'd been operating quietly, strategically, letting my success speak in whispers rather than press releases. But now I was ready to make some noise. I didn't want petty revenge. I wanted poetic revenge. And to pull it off, I had to do three things. Identify the pressure points, get close without alerting them, and choose a moment so public, so irreversible, that it would echo in their circles long after I left the room. First, the pressure points. Chase was easy. His startup fund, Momentum Capital, was bleeding. His main investor had bailed in March. The crypto winter wasn't thawing fast enough, and rumor had it his emerging markets portfolio was built on shaky legal frameworks. I knew this because a client of mine, a London-based fund manager, had run due diligence on one of Chase's acquisitions. I saw the red flags before he did. And Chase, being Chase, still walked around like he was a week away from ringing the bell at NASDAQ. Daniela's mom, Eloise, was trickier. She still had social currency, still ran the family's name through charity galas and museum boards. But I knew about the deal she was trying to close, a discreet acquisition of pre-war European artifacts being shipped from Prague. She wanted them to be the centerpiece of a new exhibit she was curating at the Metropolitan. That deal was mine now. Her team didn't know it yet, but the Prague-based transport firm they were working with? My company acquired it last month through a shell LLC. It was quiet, boring work. Paperwork. Signatures. But it meant I now had full visibility into every crate, every manifest, every piece of cargo she was trying to secure. As for Daniela's dad, Martin, well, he was a legacy guy. The kind of man who looked at the world like a spreadsheet, numbers over names. His weakness wasn't greed. It was pride. And his biggest vulnerability? His upcoming keynote at the Tri-State Private Wealth Conference. He'd been invited to speak about the future of legacy investing and planned to unveil a new family investment arm. One Chase was supposed to co-lead. The announcement would mark the symbolic passing of the torch. Their big moment. That would be my moment too. But to execute this properly, I needed access. I couldn't just crash their party and expect fireworks. I needed a reason to be in the room. And I had one. His name was Arjun Patel. Arjun was a quiet billionaire. Not the loud kind you see on magazine covers. He ran a sprawling logistics empire across Asia and Europe and had become one of my most valuable clients. I'd helped his company with a sensitive rerouting contract during a border dispute, and in return, he owed me a favor. I called it in. I need a guest pass to the TSPW conference, I told him. He laughed. Is that it? I was expecting something illegal. I'll be polite, I said. He paused. You going to make someone cry, Oscar? Just enough to make it stick. The pass arrived the next morning. Now that I had my target, my leverage, and my access. I just needed to tighten the noose. And that meant involving someone I never thought I'd speak to again. Daniela. I hadn't responded to her apology. Hadn't texted, called, liked, or commented. Radio silence. But now I needed her to hear something. I needed her curiosity back. Not her affection, just her attention. I knew how to get it. I sent a single text. Oscar, your mother might want to double-check her Prague shipment paperwork. Someone made a change. It took her all of 3 minutes to reply. Daniela, what are you talking about? I left it on read. 5 minutes later, she called. I didn't answer. Instead, I sent a follow-up text. Oscar, tell Chase he should vet his Cayman SBVs more carefully. The filing errors alone could get him delisted from half his prospects. Another silence. This one longer. Then, Daniela, is this revenge? I didn't reply, because it wasn't revenge. Not yet. It was chess. That afternoon, I reached out to one of my favorite weapons, Amira. Amira was my head of compliance, legal strategist, and former white-collar defense attorney who left a 7-figure firm because she was tired of defending guilty bankers. She was brilliant, discreet, and had a photographic memory. She also hated people who looked down on the help. I gave her the file. All of it. Every document, timestamp, and email I'd collected from the Prague acquisition, the crypto fund loopholes, the investor statements from Momentum Capital, even a list of questionable expense reports filed under the new family investment arm. Nothing illegal, yet, but just enough to raise alarms. She read through it in silence, then looked up at me. You want me to leak this? I shook my head. Not yet. I want to time it. To what? To the moment they feel safest. She smiled. Let me guess. The keynote. I nodded. We built a timeline, crafted anonymous tips, scheduled filings, sent out feelers to a couple of investigative journalists Amira knew who specialized in private sector fraud. We didn't say it was about Daniela's family. We let them connect the dots. A trail of breadcrumbs with just enough ambiguity to be dangerous. And while that was brewing, I reached out to another ghost from my past. Jordan. Jordan was Daniela's ex before me. A mutual friend once told me he'd been dumped for being too ambitious and not polished enough. Sound familiar? He now ran a boutique venture firm with a reputation for helping underdogs get their shot. I'd met him once, years ago, and remembered how awkward he looked trying to impress her family at a dinner party. I found him through LinkedIn. Hey Jordan. Strange outreach, I know, but I'm putting together a new fund. Silent partners only. Would love your brain on some ideas. He replied in under an hour. We grabbed lunch. Turns out, Jordan had his own scars from that family. The same subtle jabs, the "you're almost there" approval, the same way Daniela's mom talked to him like he was a side project. But what struck me most? He wasn't bitter. He was calm, wiser. I told him what I was planning, not all of it, just enough to gauge his reaction. He didn't flinch. You sure you want to pull the pin on this grenade? He asked. I nodded. I'm not trying to destroy them. Just remind them who they underestimated. He thought about it, then smiled. Count me in. That night, I wrote the final piece of the plan. A speech. Not one I'd deliver publicly. No, this would be private. A letter of sorts. To Daniela, but also to her entire family. Not cruel. Not vengeful. Just honest. I'd include it in the press release I planned to send after the conference. Because here's the thing. I didn't want to be remembered as the bitter ex. I didn't want to be a ghost haunting their dinner parties. I wanted to be the name they couldn't say without wincing. The lesson they taught their kids when discussing hubris. The story Chase's future PR rep would beg him not to bring up on podcasts. And I wanted them to know that every move they made, the ones they thought were harmless jabs, polite mockery, harmless gatekeeping, every single one had led to this moment. The keynote was 5 days away. I had the access. I had the plan. It was the kind of crisp, clear morning that felt made for a reckoning. The Tri-State Private Wealth Conference took place inside one of Manhattan's most ostentatious venues, a chandelier-strewn ballroom with golden pillars, waiters in white gloves, and the kind of crowd where everyone wore watches that cost more than my first apartment. But I wasn't there to impress anyone. I was there to watch the curtain fall. I arrived early, not out of anxiety, but because I wanted to walk the battlefield before the war. My badge read, Oscar Castell, Strategic Advisor, Duval Patel Holdings. It was real enough. Arjun had temporarily onboarded me as an advisor for one of his infrastructure subsidiaries. Nobody blinked twice. In fact, Several attendees nodded at me with that polished smile that rich people reserve for someone they might need later. It was a strange shift. How respect suddenly flowed when you had the right name on your badge. I scoped out the ballroom. Third row center. Perfect view. The podium was framed with banners for the conference and the Future of Legacy Wealth initiative. Martin Whitaker, Daniela's father, was listed as the keynote speaker in bold gold font. Beneath that, introducing the Whitaker Family Investment Arm, a new era begins. I almost smiled. Everything was exactly where it needed to be. By 10:43 a.m., the ballroom was full. Daniela was seated near the front, next to Chase, who looked like he hadn't slept in days. His suit was sharp, but his collar was slightly wrinkled, his hands restless. Eloise sat 2 rows behind them, already speaking to a journalist I recognized from the New York Financial Post. Amira texted me one word. Clear. That meant all the triggers were in place. The financial reporters had received their anonymous tips. The compliance irregularities were now in the inbox of the SEC's whistleblower division. And the final email, an encrypted file with detailed inconsistencies in Chase's Cayman filings, was scheduled to hit his partner's inbox the moment Martin stepped up to the microphone. 10:55 a.m. Lights dimmed. A spotlight snapped on, and Martin Whitaker took the stage. He walked with practiced ease. Tall, silver-haired, designer suit with subtle pinstripes. The image of generational wealth. His voice carried through the ballroom like a sermon, smooth, self-assured, rehearsed. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, it is with great pride that I introduce a new chapter in our family's legacy. Behind him, a slideshow clicked into motion. A polished logo, a timeline of family investments, a slide labeled Transitioning to the Next Generation, with Chase's smug face and an outdated photo of Daniela in a power suit. The room applauded. Martin continued, today marks not just a shift in our family's holdings, but a promise to invest in a smarter, more dynamic future. And leading that charge is my son, Chase Whitaker. Chase stood up, nodded at the crowd like a prince about to receive his crown. That's when it started. One of the journalists, older, sharp-eyed, with a press badge tucked into his lapel, stood up mid-sentence. Mr. Whitaker, he said, can you comment on the recent document leak suggesting irregularities in your son's crypto fund, including unregistered Cayman-based entities? The room froze. Martin faltered. I'm sorry, I don't believe I'm aware of any such. A second journalist stood. Is it true that the Whitaker family used offshore accounts to shift liability for failing startups under shell corporations owned by their investment clients? Murmurs swept the ballroom. Heads turned. Cameras clicked. Chase's face went pale. Daniela looked from the reporters to her father, then to Chase. What is this? She hissed. Martin held up a hand. Let's keep this professional, please. We can clarify all rumors at the appropriate. Then the projector behind him, still connected to his presentation laptop, began flickering. A new slide appeared. Unscheduled. Unplanned. It was a spreadsheet. A Cayman tax filing. Then another slide. An internal memo from Momentum Capital's legal advisor warning of exposure risk. Then another, an email from Chase, dated 8 months ago. We'll just bury it under the shell. No one's going to audit this. The ballroom erupted. Chase lunged toward the podium, yanking the laptop cord, but it was too late. Phones were already out. Reporters were live tweeting. Someone in the back was filming. A man in a gray suit whispered something into a microphone on his collar and left the room swiftly. Eloise stood, visibly shaking. What is going on? And then I stood. Quietly. Calmly. I walked up the side aisle as security began forming a loose perimeter around the podium. I wasn't rushing. I wanted them to see me. Martin looked directly at me as I reached the front row. His eyes narrowed. You, he said. I smiled slightly. Congratulations on the new chapter, Martin. Shame about the paperwork. Chase's voice cracked. You did this. I tilted my head. I just told the truth. The rest, well, that's your legacy, isn't it? Security began ushering people out. Martin tried to speak again, but the microphone had already been cut. The conference organizers were red-faced, panicked, pulling the banners down. As I turned to leave, Daniela grabbed my arm. Oscar, what are you doing? Her voice wasn't angry. It was confused, wounded. I looked at her for a long moment. You told me once, I said slowly, that I should be grateful just to sit at your table. She flinched. And for a while I was. I smiled through it. Laughed with your brother. Nodded when your mom corrected my French. But I never belonged at your table. She looked away. I stepped closer. I was building my own. Her voice cracked. So this is revenge. No, I said. This is the bill. You just never thought you'd have to pay it. And I walked out. The fallout came quickly. By evening, the conference was trending. Whitaker wealth scandal was splashed across finance blogs. Chase's fund was suspended pending investigation. One of their overseas investors froze all transactions. Rumors swirled about potential charges. Martin resigned from the board of his family trust to focus on legal matters. Eloise's acquisition? Blocked. The artifacts flagged as part of a compliance review due to chain of custody questions. The museum pulled the exhibit. Quietly, without a statement. I heard, weeks later, that Chase tried to pivot to a podcast about resilience and rebuilding. It flopped. Daniela moved out of the city. Word was, she went back to consulting. Low profile. No more interviews. No more panels. Just silence. As for me, I didn't speak about it again. I never posted, never gloated. I let the facts settle like dust. My company doubled in size that quarter. Arjun offered me a permanent stake in one of his firms. Amira got promoted to COO. Jordan's firm invested in our next expansion. I stayed quiet, but they never forgot. And that, in the end, was the perfect revenge. Not that I ruined them, but that I never needed them. And they finally realized it far too late.